Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. My name is Mo, and I'll be sitting in the host chair today. I have back with me the one and the only Dr. Lem and What's up, man?
Yes, sir. Always great to be on a call with you and looking forward to talking about leadership and how we can, simplify the complexities of it, man.
Well, why don't you give the audience a little bit of an understanding of the title of this specific leadership lesson and what inspired it?
I was looking through, before I get into that, I was looking through like the list of chapters, and I typically will mark off, the chapters that we've already done. And, I remember when you first said like, let's record 50 chapters. I'm like, "Oh, dude, that just seems like a lot of work," but I think we have like less than 10 left. Like we recorded a lot of them, man. So thank you for forcing me to do this, you know.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's
This
my pleasure, dude, for sure.
this is and it's been good to go back to read some of these things. Today's lesson is the old way of leadership, and there's an old motto, there's a lot of and if you think about it, it's not just leadership, like we'll talk about this, but there's an old way of doing things. And like if you don't update and if you don't stay relevant, then you're gonna get lost in it, but kind of the gist of it, the old way of leadership still works, but there's a new way of doing things, and we sometimes need to update.
Yeah, I'd love to get right into this. I want to start here. Why do you think that some leaders still cling to the old model of leadership?
Well, the old model of leadership worked for them. It worked for them for decades, you know what I mean? And they were able to do their job. They were able to innovate and make stuff happen. But the world has changed, the way we do things have changed. The way we do media has changed. The way that, we lead people has changed. Like it used to be this linear progression. If you just did these like menial jobs and entry level jobs that you could eventually move up. But now, like with the internet and being able to do things online, you could build things faster. You can skip steps and you can, well, there's a lot of CEO of companies that, have never done anything. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah.
easier these days to like skip all of those steps, and they're just a new way of doing things. And I think the internet and being online, the digital interaction that we can have has changed marketing, it's changed leadership, it's changed like the way that we have friends and the way that we interact and communicate with each other. And so the old way still works, but things are changing.
So, is there a psychological comfort in maintaining control that makes it hard for leaders to let go? Because I feel like that's kind of the old way of doing leadership and having control, making sure that you have your hands in every part of the pie. Tell
Yeah.
me about that. And is that changing?
Yeah. Well, so I would say that comfort, there's definitely psychological comfort in the old way, but I would say there's also psychological comfort in the new way. And so if you're doing it the old way, like that's the way that and that's the way that you're used to. I think there is this thing inside of us that needs control. There's this thing inside of us that needs to resolve what we don't know. You know what I mean? And so having instead of figuring out a new way of doing it, a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders are like, let's just do what has worked in the past is going to work in the future. But if the world has changed, like the stuff that you did in the past may not necessarily work for the stuff in the future. And so that's why we have these conversations, because we want to distill it down to the things that make leadership work. And so that's part of this conversation. But yeah, like people stay comfortable, they want the control, and it's scary to innovate, it's scary to lead, and so that's why we're having this conversation.
Of course, words matter, and we need to define, as you're talking about the old way in leadership.
Yeah.
So, for the audience, how would you describe the key traits of the old way of leadership?
So the old way is hierarchical, right? There was the guy that was in charge, the boss, the main leader, and then everybody else was a follower. Everybody fell in line in this hierarchy. But now when we talk about leadership, the leader can be the leader, but you could still lead in these different areas, right? And so like even at a lower area, you still have things that you have influence over it that you could lead in that area. We talk about self-leadership on this podcast. The other thing too is I was thinking about this, and if you start thinking about the leadership books that were written in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of that leadership had to do with manufacturing and industry. And yeah, they would innovate and change things, but there was still a lot of like making and manufacturing that went along with this leadership conversation. And then these days, we've like outsourced a lot of the making and manufacturing to other places. And so now a lot of the leadership that we talk about these days has to do with people as opposed to innovating a process or innovating in manufacturing or in industry. And so part of the old way is leadership over organizations, leadership over compliance and manufacturing. And leadership these days has to do more, I think, with people. I mean, we talk about emotional intelligence as leadership and maturity and character development. And I think leadership in times gone by didn't necessarily care about that. It was just about like, get it done. And so, you know, in order to, well, we're just a lot more sensitive these days too. You know what I'm saying? Like we get easily hurt about stuff. And so like those are a part of, that's a part of the leadership journey to take care of people and to honor and respect people.
So does the old way of leadership work in any environments today?
So I would say that the old way of leadership, structured settings, manufacturing lines, like is what I think today we would call management. Because in certain situations, if you're managing a process, if you're managing a McDonald's where the systems are in place and you know, like everything is regulated, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Like in those settings where it's structured and rigid, management and that style of leadership works. But in an environment where you're dealing with people and it's not necessarily as structured, I think you need a little bit more emotional intelligence. I think you need more cultural intelligence. And it's not so much about the process, but about the people.
One of the things you've said before is that control is often an illusion in leadership. So
Yeah.
can you explain that?
Yeah, no leader has control of everything, right? The markets shift, people leave, unexpected challenges arise, a pandemic shows up. I mean, you cannot control everything. And I think the illusion comes from thinking that you have to micromanage the outcomes. And I think great leadership isn't about controlling variables, it's about guiding people and leading people through the uncertainty. You know, we keep referencing the power bases. When you have the respect of people, when you have the loyalty of people, then it's about moving people and the organization as opposed to just like figuring out the process. And I think that makes the difference. So yeah, you can't control everything, and it's an illusion to think that you can.
Yeah, I don't think some leaders get that. And so they hoard information because they feel
Yeah.
like hoarding the information and keeping it away from other people is power. So
Yeah.
why do they feel like that?
Man, information feels like, well, information is influence. Information is leverage. And when you have all that information, you can definitely hoard that over people. But that doesn't build a leadership culture, right? It's like a power play in insecurity. Like the leaders have the knowledge, and if you don't have the knowledge, then you're below us. In reality, withholding information erodes trust and leaves people unprepared. It leaves people wondering. And like I said earlier, if you're wondering, you have the internal drive to resolve the thing. And if you don't have all the information, then you can sometimes arrive to the wrong conclusion because you don't have any of that information. And that's just not a great environment to create a leadership culture. So it actually hurts when you hoard information.
Yeah, in your article, it says that the old way, even though it still works, it's not the same as thriving. So what's the difference between surviving as a leader and thriving as a leader?
Man, I think surviving makes you relevant. It challenges status quo. You keep hitting targets and you keep things stable, and you raise morale if you're able to update and innovate. You know, thriving means inspiring your team and challenging your team members so as you adapt to change, you stay relevant, right? And the culture is relevant. And a surviving leader or surviving culture like just stays the same. We've just always done it this way. And interestingly enough, like when you look at organizations lately, I've been looking at churches that have like just stayed the same. And because they've stayed the same, they haven't grown and they haven't changed. And they're still doing the same programs, they're still singing the same songs, but they want that change. But in order to change, you and I know that like you have to do something different in order to change. And so it isn't about just trying to be culturally relevant. It's about leading, right? And one of the things that you have to do to lead is to update, to stay relevant. And so that's why we're talking about this. And somebody that's surviving is going to stay the same, but somebody thriving, somebody that's willing to do the work, will stay relevant and will be on the cutting edge of.
What are some of the warning signs that a team is in the survival mode under an old school leadership?
Man, I'll use the example that I just gave of churches doing the same thing. If you keep doing the same thing and the culture changes, then people don't come to church, right? They're disengaged. There's high turnover, there isn't buy-in, like we talked about in a previous episode. Yeah, people are just kind of there because that's all they know. And so the old way doesn't change. And so I guess for some people, like you and I were like we were just talking about, it's psychologically comfortable. It's something that they can control. And so, yeah, man, like if you're seeing people disengage and if you see people just maintaining status quo, then that's going to be a good warning sign that we're just continuing in the old way and not challenging ourselves in new and relevant ways.
So, if people want to move into being relevant and not being focused on the trends, but they do want to change and they want to adapt their leadership, how do they grab onto this relational style of leadership?
Well, the new way is collaborative, it's relational, right? It's transparent, it's human centered. It's about empowering others and sharing the why behind decisions, right? So that they can buy in. And when they buy in and they understand it, it fosters trust on the team. So like in the old way, the leaders stayed up top and just disseminated information, that people needed. And in the new way, I think in a more relevant way, leaders listen actively, they accept feedback, it prioritizes team growth over personal ego. And it's less about being the hero and more about the organization and the people in the organization, which is a characteristic of a level 5 leader, right? And so these days, like somebody that hoards that information and just, stays distant from people, like isn't necessarily a leader that anyone wants to work for, right? There isn't that trust, there isn't that like relationship. And brands and like I mean, there's a new way of marketing these days. Like you can reach out to a brand and they'll interact with you as a brand because that's the way that the world works now. Like they're not off in the distance. Like you can DM celebrities and leaders and they'll respond to it. Like it's just a different level of communication and it's just a different level of interacting with people.
Why is emotional intelligence really critical when it comes to this new model of leadership?
Man, emotional intelligence. Well, the reason why it's important is because we're not that good at it. Like, we don't educate students these days in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Like, that's why people get their feelings hurt so much because they don't have the emotional intelligence to understand, like, whatever situation that they're in. And it's a lot easier for them to just react to it and be mad or just be critical because they don't have the emotional intelligence and the emotional growth like to react to it like as an adult. You can't build trust without understanding people's motivations and fears and strengths. And emotional intelligence, your emotional quotient really helps you to read the room, to navigate conflict, to really inspire loyalty and have relationships with people. And so, like, these days we just do things like online and we're really not that great at face to face. Well, the next generation isn't as great face to face, because they just don't do that anymore. You know what I mean? Like everything's going online and digital. And so I think this emotional intelligence piece that we keep bringing up in these episodes really matter.
Yeah, you're right. Things really are changing in the way that we do meetings, the way that we do life, relationships. A lot of that's changing, but you can't take away the importance of face-to-face interaction, for instance. And so, how do you see the role of a leader involving in today's culture? What does that look like?
Man, the first example that I think of is in education. Like for years, it was the sage on the stage, the teacher up front, right? And now in education, they talk about it being the guide on the side. So it's not you up front, it's you with your students. And then there's this other concept called the flipped classroom, where the homework is done in class as opposed to the homework done at home, so that you can help them process through things. I think much is the same in leadership. Like today's leaders are more like coaches than bosses, right? They're
Yeah.
facilitators as opposed to being at top and being distant and being like a dictator. You know what I mean? You're creating environments where people feel safe. You're creating environments where people feel comfortable. We talk about creating a leadership culture that's built on trust. And that's why Lencioni wrote about this book. Like, wrote about the five dysfunctions of the team. Like, you gotta be in relationships with people. People have to trust you. And so the role of the leader is changing. Like, it's more about the people as opposed to the process or the programs. And the emotional quotient and your emotional intelligence really helps you with leadership.
Yeah, we talk about trust a lot on this show and transparency. So, what's the danger, if any, in leaders who withhold the information because they say, "Well, I've got to do this for the good of the organization"?
Yeah. Well, they think they're doing it for the good of the organization, but as they withhold information, I think it creates a culture of mistrust. It's not a culture of leadership. It then becomes about managing, right? It's a culture of managing. Well, I have to manage the situation. I have to manage the organization. I have to manage the people. And if you're managing, then you're not leading. And so I think, like I said earlier, teams and individuals like need to resolve the gaps, and they'll resolve it with assumptions, right? Which breeds confusion or resentment or mistrust. It also limits their ability to make informed decisions. So if you're withholding information from them, they're not making the best decisions because they don't have all the information. So you end up hurting your organization and your teams because you withhold information.
Yeah, I don't think people really understand transparency as well as they need to. I think people think that they're being transparent, and that's kind of a buzzword that we've been using. Everybody's saying we're a very transparent company or organization, but they're
Yeah.
only as transparent as allows them to continue to look good. And so let's take transparency at its best. How does transparency actually build team strength and resilience? Is there a downside of it? Because I don't want somebody to know all my faults. I don't mind if my team knows some of my faults, but when I go home, I don't want them to know that I don't know how to fix my sprinklers right, or I said an accidental cuss word when I stubbed my toe
Sure.
on,
Sure.
coming like. So, how does transparency actually work, and how transparent does a leader need to be for a strong, resilient team?
Man, that's a great question. I think that transparency will help your team. Transparency will help develop trust. And man, attitude reflects leadership, right? Your team is gonna do what you do as the leader. So as if you're authentic, and here's the deal, it's not about sharing all of your faults. It's about showing up as an authentic leader and an authentic person. That creates an environment where your team members can also be authentic and they can also be real and transparent. And so I think the leader sets the tone for the organization's leadership culture. And if there's transparency and authenticity, then I think the team will also follow suit and be authentic and transparent.
I noticed in this article that there was a very powerful distinction between leading an organization and leading
Yes.
people. What's the difference and why does it matter?
So leading an organization focuses on systems, KPIs, processes, outcomes. Leading people focuses on relationships, motivation, growth. Like it takes emotional intelligence, it takes strength of character. Systems don't innovate or stay loyal, but people do, right? So if you only manage the machine or the system, you miss the heart of what drives success, and you miss the heart of what drives organizations. And like, you know, you can move people. You can't really move systems or processes. And so I'm not saying that you don't manage systems, but just know the difference. You're managing systems and you're leading people.
I think that's That's a difficult one for a lot of people to grasp because there is a difference, and sometimes those lines can get blurred. So, for leaders who want to get better, they want to be transparent, they don't want to hang on to the old, but they don't want to just follow the trends.
Yeah.
How can they move from being above their team to being with their team and still lead?
Yeah. Oh man. So when I hear you ask that question, like my first thought is that I've made a lot of money as a consultant helping leaders just be in relationship with their team members. Because sadly, it doesn't happen. There's a lot of leaders that like just stay distant from their team and they don't even know their team members. And so, I mean, it's easy to tell them what to do as a leader. You're leading out of positional power, but it's so much more powerful when you use referent power and relational leadership to lead your team. So if there's one thing to do, like start with one real conversation with a team member. Just sit down with them, ask about their challenges or ideas, listen without an agenda, start to build a relationship with at least one team member. Share a bit of your own struggle or your vision, display and model what it looks like to be transparent and authentic, and they will follow suit. So, a small act of vulnerability shows that you're in it together and you're not just the boss calling the shots from above. And so, yeah, I think it takes a little bit of relational and emotional intelligence to start a conversation with a team member and, go from there.
Now, I appreciate it, brother. I take ways that we got to stay away as leaders from control, secrecy, isolation, having to be the guy, the girl that knows it all. Or we're going to get stuck and we're going to lose good people. And I don't want to lose good people. I want to build trust. I want to build transparency and I want to build connection. And that's what I hear you talking about today. So,
100%. Yep.
man, I appreciate it. For our listening audience, we're going to keep going through these. We're coming up on number 50, and I told them he's got to do 50 more. So don't worry,
Yo,
they're going to keep coming.
let's
So
go.
make sure that you like, subscribe, share this episode and the entire podcast. And we're going to break it down one leadership lesson at a time. Dr. Lem, thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure.